This presentation is going to look at the impact of multinational firms on national economies. We have already defined multinational firms as firms with production facilities in more than one country. So firms like Ford, Nestle, IBM, these are all classic multinational firms. So let's look at what impact multinationals have on the countries in which they operate. First of all, we must understand that multinationals are responsible for creating the global supply chain. Because they produce in more than one country, they're able to take components which they make in several countries and transport them to another country in order for those components to be assembled into final products. And so a single multinational, which owns companies in several countries, can be responsible by itself for creating a global supply chain. What does this benefit? How does this benefit national economies? Well, obviously, multinationals create jobs, which increases the total income of the national economy in which they operate. That is one impact, which is positive, of multinationals. They may also improve the infrastructure in the national economies in which they operate. For example, many multinationals create or build roads connecting their own factories to the ports in the countries in which they operate. Also, multinationals transfer technology to developing economies. If a Western multinational, for example, Nike, moves to a developing economy, for example, Vietnam, it will bring the production technology that it uses in the United States to Vietnam and will teach this technology to local workers. In teaching local workers, multinationals improve human capital in the developing economies in which they operate. Also, some people say that multinationals increase the GDP per capita of the countries in which they operate because they pay the workers a higher wage than the national average of the developing economy. However, this is a matter of doubt for some people who do not support globalization. They actually believe the opposite, that multinationals pay unrealistically low wages when they could afford to pay higher wages. So this is a matter of opinion. And lastly, multinationals may improve local businesses by teaching local businessmen the best practice in things like management of workers. And in this way, they may improve the standard of local businesses. So we've seen 6 good effects that multinationals may have on the domestic economies in which they operate. But to counter these good effects, there are several doubts about the benefits of multinationals, especially in developing economies, in smaller nations. When a multinational locates in a developed economy, such as Germany or France, there are rules and laws that restrict what the multinational can do. But in smaller nations, this may not be true. And in these situations, multinationals are accused of behaving badly. For one thing, they may exploit workers, such as, for example, the child labor scandal at Nike and suicides in the Chinese factories which supply Apple with its iPhones. This exploitation of workers is depriving certain people of an education because they're being employed too early in life, and this is seen as unethical by the people who do not support globalization. Multinationals are also accused of not reinvesting the profits that they make in the developing economies where they are making these profits, but rather sending the profits back to their home countries. This leads to a reduced benefit for the developing economies in which the multinationals operate. Also, people who do not support globalization say that multinationals pay wages which are much lower than they could afford to pay workers in developing economies. So this is just a case of which way one looks at this. Either one can say that they're paying higher than the national average, or one can say that they are paying far lower wages than they actually could. So in summary, multinationals have both positive and negative effects on the national economies in which they operate. And the balance between these effects really depends on one's perception and how one sees globalization as a whole, and therefore the role of multinationals in the process of globalization.